Yo, what's up, everybody? Professor V here, and this is the lecture for Abnormal Psychology, Chapter 10, Disorders Involving Gender and Sexuality. Let's go. Sex is a natural function. However, disorders involving gender and sexuality are some of the most intimate aspects of psychological functioning. And to understand these disorders related to gender, we must first understand what gender is. Gender is a psychosocial concept in which we use to determine maleness and femaleness. Gender identity is one's own psychological sense of being male or female. Gender identity is influenced by both biological and environmental factors in the form of parenting and other child-rearing behaviors. Although which type of factor has a greater effect is still controversial. Gender identity, like physical sex, is not always as straightforward as males who are masculine and females who are feminine. People's sense of gender identity does not always match their external appearance or even the sex chromosomes that determine whether they are male or female. Such people are typically termed transgendered. So again, gender is a social concept in which everyone uses to determine what is masculine behavior and feminine behavior. Gender identity is our own sense of being male or female. Gender roles, however, are expectations and in many cases what is accepted as appropriate behaviors for men and women. The term sex refers to the biological division between males and females of a species, as in gender organs. In gender dysphoria, a person experiences gender incongruence, feeling that he or she is occupying the body of the other sex, and has significant distress about the incongruence. While some people with this condition feel so strongly that they are the wrong gender that they have to have surgery to have primary and or secondary sexual sex characteristics of the gender they feel they were always meant to be. Many others prefer to receive hormone treatment only or to embrace their identity as it is. People who choose to alter themselves physically through surgery or hormonal treatments are generally termed transsexuals. Gender dysphoria is actually a new term used in the DSM-5. In the DSM-4, people with transgender identity were labeled as having gender identity disorder. However, many people argue that difference would not be equated with the term disease or disorder, and that the term stigmatizes people whose identity is different than the norm by implying that they suffer from a mental disorder because of their gender identity. As a result, gender identity disorder was replaced by gender dysphoria in the DSM-5, which emphasizes the discomfort or distress that the transgender people may experience from the mismatch between their gender identity and their designated gender.
At work, I have control over what I do. I know that my mind can control what my hands do, but the same is not true of my penis. I had begun to view sex as a basketball game. I used to play in college. When I would prepare for the game, I'd always be thinking, who was I guarding that night? I'd try to psych myself up, sketching out in my mind how to play this guy, thinking through all the possible moves and plays. I began to do the same thing with sex. If I were dating someone, I'd be thinking the whole evening about what might happen in bed. I'd always be preparing for the outcome. I'd sketch out in my mind how I was going to touch her, what I'd ask her to do. But all the time, right through dinner or the movies, I'd be worrying that I wouldn't get it up. I kept picturing her face and how disappointed she'd be. By the time we did go to bed, I was paralyzed with anxiety.
Disorders involving our gender and sexuality deal with the most intimate aspects of our psychological functioning. They involve problems relating to lack of sexual interest or difficulties with sexual performance, distress relating to our gender identity, and atypical patterns of sexual attraction.
Many times, gender dysphoria occurs or has an onset in childhood, but could not occur until adulthood in some cases. Most of the time, it begins in childhood. Some key features of gender dysphoria in childhood is strong desire to be a member of the other gender or strongly expressing the belief that one is a member of the other gender. strong preference for playing with the members of the other gender and for toys, games, and activities associated with the other gender. Personal distress about one's sexual anatomy and strong preference for wearing clothing typically associated with the other gender and rejection of clothing associated with one's own gender. Depression is often seen in those who suffer from gender dysphoria because many of the times they are having to live with being stigmatized, misunderstood, mistreated, and discriminated. Not only that, but even bullied. Also, we must understand that the gender identity not to be confused with sexual orientation. Gay males and lesbians are sexually attracted to those that belong to the same sex. However, their gender identity is consistent with their anatomical sex.
My name is Travis. I'm 35 years old. My female name was Elizabeth. So I grew up in a small town in Maine. I was such a tomboy as a kid. And my parents thankfully just let me do that. Although my mother still was trying to get me to wear dresses for just random, holidays, I guess, when I had to look conventional was the word that she used, conventional. I didn't like to wear dresses. They weren't very practical. Like if there was a tree that I wanted to be able to climb, then that would really get in the way of that. But for the most part, they let me have short hair. I rolled around in the dirt, basically. And I had a little brother, which was really fun because we got to play together. But my sister was a total nerd, smart, girly person. I mostly had male friends, and we, riding bikes and, walking around in the woods. I didn't really start becoming friends with girls until around junior high, when boys were not so interested in playing with girls anymore. It was much more gendered, I guess. I never really thought about whether or not I would ever grow out of my tomboy identity. I mean, it was definitely hard to picture myself as a grown woman. I could never see it. I could never imagine looking like my mother. I have 2 gay aunts, and one of them's pretty butch, but I saw her enough to know that if I were to be an adult woman, that's probably what I would be like. And she's a carpenter and rides a Harley and used to be a goalie for a women's hockey league. So a lot of things that I really identified with, and I really liked her and I wanted to be like her. I don't think I ever thought that I would become feminine. Thankfully, I didn't know that I wasn't that normal until I started getting social cues. And I remember I had my parents had some friends over once, and they commented on me like, oh, little girls shouldn't sit like that. And that was the first time I'd ever heard that I shouldn't be doing something a certain way. And that really stuck with me because my parents had never done that to me. I decided to cut my hair off when I was in the 6th grade. I just wanted short hair because it seemed easier to play sports with. It just wouldn't get in the way. And then I started having problems getting mistaken for a boy. And that's probably when I started realizing that I looked weird. I remember, hanging out with some skate kids, and some kid came up and asked this other kid, like, why is that guy wearing a bra? Because I had like a white shirt on and he could see my bra through it, and just thinking like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. Like, this is just so embarrassing because I wanted to be invisible. Like I hated the fact that I even had to wear a bra, like it's just so gross to me. It was horrible. So puberty was really hard and awkward, and I got sort of, uglier and more awkward, and I got really tall and gained a lot of weight. People were really like, wow, you're fat and ugly. And it really hurt me, of course, as a kid. I was so angry, and I don't know if it was because of what was happening to me, and I'm sure that there was an effect, all this external information that was happening must have had an effect on me that, of just sort of like, you look weird, you're not normal, you're not being a normal girl. I was acting out. My parents tried to get me to go to therapy. I hated it so much, but after that, something happened to me. I wanted to be different, and it's so cheesy, but I bought a pair of Chuck Taylors and joined the drama club, and all of a sudden I was like alternative, and it felt so natural. And I cut my hair again, and I had friends, and felt good about myself again. And that, I feel like that really changed my whole outlook on life. I had a high school boyfriend, and He was also in the drama club. He was actually a lead in a lot of the plays that we did. One day he just said, "Wow, you're really beautiful." And there was the first person that absolutely told me that I was beautiful besides like my mother. And I couldn't believe it. And then, later found out that, he had a crush on me. And no one had ever had a crush on me. And I certainly didn't really have crushes on other people besides, Jonathan Knight from New Kids on the Block, because it wasn't part of my reality to actually like anybody. He was funny and different and also really weird and flamboyant. We got along really well. So I eventually graduated and I went to college. I just so happened to be at the one school that a lot of the gays around Maine end up in for some weird reason. Even though I still didn't yet really know that I was gay. I mean, I think I said that I was bi, but I never really explored it. I saw myself in them, and I was watching more and more films starring lesbians and dykes and started to build on like, yes, this is who I am. Like, thank God I've been searching for someone like me, and that was the closest I found. And so I decided that I was probably gay, even though those initial attraction towards women it didn't feel sexual, but I was still attracted to them in a sense that I wanted to be with them. I wanted to be a lesbian. I was desperate to be gay, and that's what I did. I was really excited to come out as gay. It felt like I had found my community. It felt like I had been searching my whole life for it. And everything about lesbian culture, I wanted to be a part of it.
Not everyone who suffers from gender dysphoria seeks sex reassignment surgery. However, for those who do, it is an option. People with gender dysphoria may seek to change their sex organs to resemble those of the opposite gender and may undergo gender reassignment surgery to accomplish this purpose. In those that seek sex reassignment surgery, hormone treatments are also used to promote the development of secondary sex characteristics, such as the development of breast or facial hair development. One thing that is often asked is those that have sex reassignment surgery, can they not only engage in sexual activity but also reach orgasm? And the answer is yes. However, they cannot bear children because the lack of the internal reproductive organs of their newly reconstructed sex. Researchers have seen mostly positive effects on psychological adjustment and quality of life in those that are transsexual. Post-operative adjustments also tend to be more favorable in female to male surgeries. One of the reasons that may account for this is because society seems to be more accepting for women to become men versus men becoming women.
I have 2 gay aunts, and when I started coming out as a lesbian in college, I thought that would definitely be helpful. I thought that when I called my mom and said, "Guess what? I'm a lesbian. I finally figured it out." I thought she'd be so happy for me to, realize this. And she was actually just disappointed and sad. And I think that was because she had, she feels like that, her sisters had a harder life. She eventually came around. I called my dad and I was like, "Dad, I'm in love with a woman." I think what he said was, "That's okay, I've got more depressing things to think about." But he was going through a divorce with my mom at the time too. So I think the initial coming out, neither of them were jumping up excited, but it didn't take long for them to accept me and my partners. With my community, it felt great. I was surrounded by other queers and genderqueers and lesbians and all just different sorts of gays. And so I absolutely, in my community, felt great and felt good about myself and felt attractive and felt dateable and had girlfriends. But outside of that, it was really awkward. Just even going to stores and just purchasing something, it just all the time, just, he, she, what are you? And I often didn't know what to tell them because I didn't know what I was. That didn't feel very good. In the early 2000s, I joined this online community. It was kind of this blogging website. And I first joined as, I think my username was like Dyke Skate. So I was, was feeling really dyke identified. There was a lot of trans communities on this, and then I just started spending so much time reading their stories and and feeling like that was my story, that was me. And then all these things flashing back from when I was a kid, when, I thought that I was going to grow a penis. I remember stealing paper rolls, toilet paper rolls, to stand up and pee. Like all these things of these feelings started flooding back of how I wish that I could have been a boy. So when I started discovering that people like me were transitioning from female to male, I was obsessed, because there was still a part of me that was missing, the part that I didn't really feel like a lesbian. This was a really big problem in all of my lesbian relationships so far. There was this sexual attraction piece that wasn't there. And then once I discovered that a lot of these F to M trans guys were dating other men, and that was another sort of subcategory of being an F to M, a female to male, I knew that was me. That my whole life, it just made sense that I was a boy and that I wanted to date other men. I can be masculine, I can be myself, and I can be attracted to other men, because as a lesbian, I couldn't be attracted to other men because that didn't make any sense. It hit me so strong that I had to transition from female to male. That this was me. The next step after realizing that I had to do this was to take testosterone. And the process then, this was about 10 years ago, was you had to be in therapy for, I think, 6 months, and you had to get a letter, and then once you got that letter saying that you were sane, you could get this medicine. I already was in therapy, so it was really no big deal. Basically, it was, when are you ready? And then finally I said, okay, I'm ready. And I got a prescription for testosterone and started injecting. I felt like $1,000,000. My body started to change. I was working out more. My voice was changing. I started passing, where before it was awkward when I was called a man, I was all of a sudden just delighted for the first time. It felt so good, and especially once I changed my name and had all my documents changed, so everything said Travis. There was no question. On the street, people just saw me as a guy, and I felt free to just be me, just walk down the street with my shoulders up, just to feel good about myself. So after being on testosterone for about 6 months, I decided to have top surgery, which is just removing my chest. I woke up and I didn't have boobs anymore, and all of a sudden I didn't have to bind, which is taking ace bandages or like really tight sports bras or these other compression shirts to sort of flatten out your chest. And all of a sudden I could wear a tank top. I had no boobs, and it felt absolutely incredible. It felt like such a gift. My friends described me after starting to transition from female to male as blossoming, that all of a sudden they could see something different in me, this kind of spark that maybe wasn't there before, this confidence. I all of a sudden felt really social too, and I felt like I had a community of friends. I had an actual community of other trans people like myself, but other people. I mean, when you open yourself up to the world, and the world is there for you, but I think that I felt often very closed off from the world because I felt like such an outsider, and all of a sudden I felt like I had a place in it, and it felt really good. I felt attractive for the first time, and maybe forever, because even when my high school boyfriend called me beautiful, I still felt weird. I mean, I was tall and huge and had weird hair, and I didn't really believe him. I was like, okay, that's cool, but like, I don't believe you. But for the first time, I was like, yeah, I feel good about myself.
Psychodynamic theorists point to extremely close mother-son relationships, empty relationships with parents, and fathers who were absent or detached. This may foster strong identifications with the mother and young males, leading to a reversal of expected gender roles and identity. Girls with weak, ineffectual mothers and strong, masculine fathers may overly identify with their fathers and develop a psychological sense of themselves as little men. Learning theorists point to an absence of a father in the case of boys, meaning no strong male role model. And children that have other strong male role models may have a lower chance of developing gender dysphoria. Some researchers believe that exposure to certain hormones during fetal development not only causes the formation of the sexual organs, but also predisposes the infant to behavior that is typically associated with one gender or the other. There have been several studies of infant girls who were exposed to male sex hormones, also called androgens, before birth. For example, some drugs to prevent miscarriages are male hormones. In these studies, the girls were found to be tomboys during early childhood, preferring to play with typical boy toys, wrestling, and playing rough, and playing with boys rather than other girls. However, when these girls grew up, they became more typically female in their desire for marriage and motherhood, which many of these same researchers took as evidence that upbringing won out over the hormonal influences.
One! Make my monster grow!
Whoa, it's got a little bit bigger, didn't I? The book doesn't discuss homosexuality too much because this is a course on abnormal behavior. This chapter is about abnormal sexual behaviors. However, homosexuality is not a psychological disorder. It is not a disease or syndrome. It is also not a choice. While the book does not discuss homosexuality, I feel that it is still important to understand the basis of homosexuality and the development of homosexuality. The following is a video on homosexuality that helps with the understanding of it not being a disorder or a choice. While homosexuality is still not fully understood, there is a strong link to a biological basis. Also, I apologize for the length of this next video.
There are few issues as hotly contested and as poorly understood as the question of what makes a person gay or straight. It's a political question, a social question, a religious question, but it's also a science question, one that might someday have an actual provable answer. The handful of scientists who work in this underfunded and politically charged field will tell you that answer is a long way off. But as we reported last spring, their efforts are already yielding tantalizing clues. One focus of their research is twins. These bedrooms belong to twins who are 9 years old. One room is all camouflage, airplanes, and military toys. The other, well, see for yourself. A pastel canopy, stuffed animals, white horses. Not all that surprising for boy-girl twins. Except these twins
What's your base code?
are Jared and Adam.
I have the Marines parking only. And
When I came for a visit, Jared was eager to show me his G.I. Joe collection.
I have ones that say like Marine and SWAT, and then that's where I keep all the guns for them.
Adam, on the other hand,
This is one of my dolls, Rat's baby. This is made by the company that made this and this.
I hate to interrupt you, but I just noticed you have nail polish on with stars
And diamonds.
and diamonds. I have to ask you a question. Did you go to school like that today?
I just showed them my nails and they were like, why did you do that? I was like,
Adam's behavior is called childhood gender nonconformity, meaning a child whose interests and behaviors are more typical of the opposite sex. Research shows that kids with extreme gender nonconformity usually grow up to be gay. Danielle is Adam and Jared's mom. How early on did you notice this difference?
About 18 months, he was really into asking for a Barbie. He wanted a Barbie.
At 18 months?
At 18 months.
And what about Jared? What was he asking at 18
Fire trucks.
months?
Fire trucks.
Not that much has changed. Jared's favorite game now is Battlefield 2 Special Forces. What's your favorite game?
It's called Neopets, the Darkest Fairy.
If you were going to tell a stranger what you were like, what would you say?
I'm a kid who likes G.I. Joes and games and TV. I would say like a girl.
You would say, I'm like a girl? That's what you would say? Why do you think that is? Michael Bailey, a psychology professor at Northwestern University, is a leading researcher in the field of sexual orientation. They've grown up in the same house. They've been treated the same way.
To me, cases like that really scream out, hey, it's not out there, it's in here. There's no indication that this mother is prone to raise very feminine boys because his twin is not that way.
So you don't think it's nurture?
I don't think that nurture is a plausible explanation.
Psychologists used to believe homosexuality was caused by nurture, namely overbearing mothers and distant fathers. But that theory has been disproved. Today, scientists are looking at genes, environment, brain structure, hormones. There's one area of consensus that homosexuality involves more than just sexual behavior. It's physiological. Bailey and his colleagues have set up a series of experiments in his lab at Northwestern.
The Chicago winters are harsh.
In this study, researcher Gerolf Rieger had gay and straight people sit in a chair and talk. He then reduced them to silent black and white figures and asked volunteers to see if they could tell gay from straight. The idea was to find out if certain stereotypes were real and observable.
She looks quite feminine to me.
He's gay.
This is a man? Already I can see.
He's gay. He's straight.
That was so powerful.
Exactly.
Like me, more often than not, the volunteers in the study could tell who was gay and who wasn't.
So is the conclusion that gay people do, in fact, move differently?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not true 100% of the time. It is true on average. They also studied the way gay and straight people talk.
Hi, it's nice to meet you. Would you like to have a drink?
Sounds straight to me.
And he is straight.
Hi, it's nice to meet you. Do you want to go have a drink?
Gay.
This research is controversial, reinforcing the stereotypes, some say. But to Bailey, the stereotype suggests there's a feminizing of the brain in gay men and masculinizing in lesbians. But how and when does this feminizing occur? If the differences were already apparent in childhood, that would point to an early, perhaps even genetic origin. And that's what Bailey and Rieger are testing in a new study using childhood home movies. Here, volunteers were asked to rate each child's femininity or masculinity.
Oh, so girly.
I took the test.
How about a big smile?
And rated both these girls highly feminine. Then he showed me this little girl.
She's really not girly. Isn't that interesting?
Okay.
She's not girly.
I'm going to give him a masculine.
These cars go in there too.
8,693 plus 4 divided by half. What does that equal? Jennifer!
Turns out these physical differences can emerge fairly early. This little girl, she grew up to be straight. This little girl grew up to be a lesbian. The little boy with the gun is straight, and the game show host is gay.
They make spring a lot nicer.
If you can spot a child's future sexual orientation before he even knows he has one, doesn't that prove it's genetic? Studies have shown that homosexuality runs in families, so genes must be the answer. But then the researchers tell you identical twins can have different sexual orientations. We found Steve and Greg Lofts in New York. As identical twins, they had the same upbringing, have the same DNA, and yet Greg is gay and Steve is straight.
When you meet people and they find out you're gay and you're not, what do they say?
Are you sure? How can that be? Yeah, sure. Everyone is curious about that.
There were signs even when they were little kids. Their mother told us Steve loved sports and the outdoors, while Greg liked helping out in the kitchen. But it wasn't until high school that Steve became convinced Greg was gay.
Did you say anything to him, or?
I did, actually. I think the way I worded it was something like, Greg, if you're gay, it's okay. I'll still love you the same. And he gave a very philosophical answer. He said something like, I love the soul of a person and not the physical being. And in my mind, I was like, yep, he's gay.
I wasn't ready just yet.
Does this prove that it's not genetic?
What it proves is it's not completely genetic. They have the same genes.
So does that bring us back to the mother and the father?
No.
But that's environment.
That's environment, but that's not the only environment. There's also the environment that happens to us while we're in the womb. And scientists are realizing that environment is much more important than we ever thought it was.
And this newborn rat pup, oddly enough, may hold important clues to what happens in the womb. Dr. Mark Breedlove at Michigan State University says he can take this male rat and make it behave like a female for the rest of its life, and vice versa for a female, just by altering the hormones it's exposed to right at birth. Because rats are born underdeveloped, that's roughly the same as altering a third trimester human fetus in the womb. But first, he said, I'd need a crash course in rat sex.
He's a Romeo.
He's Romeo. Ooh, look at him. Male rats like Romeo mount any rat that comes their way. In the mating process, the female, that's her being dropped on top of him, performs something called lordosis, where she lifts her head and rump. Now, what if Romeo here goes after a male?
The male will seem profoundly indifferent.
But Breedlove says he can change all that. He gave this female rat a single shot of the male sex hormone testosterone at birth. Now grown up, she will never perform lordosis. But this male rat will. Take a look. He was castrated at birth, depriving him of testosterone. So you created a gay rat.
I wouldn't say that these are gay rats, but I will say that these are genetic male rats who are showing much more feminine behavior.
So this could be the answer to the genetic question. It may not be genes. It could be hormones.
That's exactly the question that we're all wondering, this business of testosterone having such a profound influence. Does that have some relevance to humans?
While biologists look at hormones for answers about human sexuality, other scientists are looking for patterns in statistics. And hard as this is to believe, they have found something they call the older brother effect.
The more older brothers a man has, the greater that man's chance of being gay.
What? Say that again?
The more older brothers a man has, the greater the likelihood that that man will be gay.
Is that true?
That is absolutely true.
Absolutely true.
Absolutely.
If this comes as a shock to you, you're not alone. But it turns out it's one of the most solid findings in this field, demonstrated in study after study. And the numbers are significant. For every older brother a man has, his chances of being gay increase by 1/3. Older sisters make no difference, and there's no corresponding effect for lesbians. A firstborn son has about a 2% chance of being gay, and the numbers rise from there. The theory is it happens in the womb.
Somehow the mother's body is remembering how many boys she's carried before. The favorite hypothesis is that the mother may be making antibodies when she sees a boy the first time and then affect subsequent boys when she carries them in utero.
You mean like she's carrying a foreign substance?
And if you think about it, a woman who's carrying a son for the first time, she is carrying a foreign substance.
Yeah.
There are some proteins encoded on his Y chromosome that her body has never seen before, and that her immune system would be expected to regard as invaders. And
so that's a theory.
That's the theory.
It's still not proved, and it gets even stranger.
One of the things we've only found out lately is that older brothers affect a boy only if the boy is right-handed. If the boy
Wait a minute.
I know. If the boy is left-handed, if his brain is organized in a left-handed fashion, it doesn't matter how many older brothers he has. His probability of being gay is just like the rest of the population.
You can give yourself a headache trying to apply all the theories to real people. Greg and Steve Lofts are both right-handed, and they do have an older brother, so maybe that's why Greg is gay. But they also have several gay relatives, which suggests it could be in the genes. Except where does that leave Steve? Adam and Jared, fraternal twins, have older brothers, but they're ambidextrous. And then there's the question of how something in the womb could affect one twin, but not the other. There are many more questions at this point than answers, but the scientists we spoke to are increasingly convinced that genes, hormones, or both, something is happening to determine sexual orientation before birth. Adam has come up with his own theory.
I was supposed to be a girl in my mom's stomach, but my mom wished for all boys, so I turned into a boy.
Do you wish you were a girl? You do? Do you think there was anything that you could have done that would have changed Adam?
I could have changed Adam on the outside to where he would have showed me the macho boy that I would want as a boy. But that would not change who he is inside, and I think that would have damaged him a lot more.
This is an interesting question. Are you both proud of the way you are?
Yep.
Both of you. And you're so different.
Moving forward to paraphilic disorders. Paraphilias are sexual deviations involving patterns of sexual arousal to atypical stimuli. To be diagnosed with a paraphilic disorder, the paraphilic behavior must cause personal distress, impairments in daily functioning, or involve behaviors in which satisfaction of sexual urges are harmful or risky to other people. Often, paraphilias are labeled by others as deviant, bizarre, or kinky. Paraphilias can also involve strong and recurrent sexual arousal to atypical stimuli, as evidenced by fantasies, urges, or behaviors, which is acting upon those urges. The range of atypical sexual behaviors can include non-human objects such as underwear, shoes, leather, or silk, humiliation, or experiences of pain in oneself or one's partner, or children, and other persons who do not or cannot grant consent. We also established that a paraphilia may not necessarily be a paraphilic disorder. For example, a shoe fetish. If someone has a shoe fetish who practices the fetishistic behavior privately at home without any negative consequences, is a paraphilia, but not necessarily paraphilic disorder. There is no harm to the fetish or others. To be diagnosed with a paraphilic disorder, the paraphilic behavior must cause personal distress, impairments in daily functioning, or involve behaviors in which satisfaction of sexual urges are harmful or risky to other people. For some people who have a paraphilic disorder, engaging in their paraphilia becomes the only means of achieving sexual gratification. They cannot become sexually aroused unless certain stimuli are used, in actuality or in fantasies. There are several serious types of paraphilia which result in paraphilic disorders, one in which is exhibitionism. Exhibitionism is characterized by strong and recurrent urges, fantasies, or behaviors of exposing of one's genitals to unsuspecting individuals for the purpose of sexual arousal. Typically, a person seeks to surprise, shock, or sexually arouse a person. What is surprising, though, is that in a national survey, only 4% of male exhibitionists and 2% of female exhibitionists reported exposing their genitals for purposes of sexual arousal. Exhibitionists typically do not seek sexual contact with the victim. However, some people who expose their genitals progress to more serious crimes of sexual aggression. Men who engage in this behavior do so as a means of indirectly expressing their hostility toward women due to perceptions of mistreatment or rejection by women in the past. There are correlations with shyness, loneliness, dependence, lacking of personal skills, difficulty relating to women, establishing relationships with women, doubt of masculinity, or feelings of inferiority with male exhibitionism. People who engage in exhibitionism are motivated by the wish to shock and dismay unsuspecting observers, not to show off the attractiveness of their bodies. This is why wearing a bathing suit or revealing clothing is not a form of exhibitionism, nor are exotic dancers, as the main goal of dancers is to earn money. Another paraphilia is fetishism, which is a recurrent, powerful sexual urge, fantasy, or behaviors towards inanimate objects such as articles of clothing like bras, panties, hosiery, shoes, etc. However, it is not abnormal for men to become sexually aroused by the sight, feel, or smell other partners' undergarments. What makes it a fetish if the person who has a fetish often prefers the object and cannot become aroused without it. They experience sexual gratification by masturbating while fondling the object, smelling it, or by having their partners wear it during sexual activity. Transvestism refers to individuals who have recurrent and powerful urges, fantasies, or behaviors in which they become sexually aroused by cross-dressing. This is different from fetishism because the transvestite men want to actually wear the articles of clothing rather than just handling them. Transvestism is not limited to gay men. It is usually found among heterosexual men. Voyeurism involves strong sexual and recurrent sexual urges, fantasies, or behaviors in which a person becomes sexually aroused by watching unsuspecting people, generally strangers, who are naked, disrobing, or engaging in sexual activity. It is most common in men, just as exhibitionism. And also, just like exhibitionism, men do not seek sexual contact with the victims, but are sexually aroused by watching others engage in sexual activity. The thought of being caught heightens the excitement and arousal in which they experience. However, watching your partner disrobe or viewing sexually explicit films is not a form of voyeurism. The people who are being viewed know that they are being watched or will be observed by film audiences. Attending a strip club is also not a form of voyeurism because it does not involve sexual arousal by watching unsuspecting persons. The voyeur often masturbates while watching or while fantasizing about watching. They often lack in sexual experiences and may harbor deep feelings of inferiority or inadequacy. This may be their only outlet of sexual gratification. Flirterism is recurrent, powerful sexual urges, fantasies, or behaviors in which a person becomes sexually aroused by rubbing against or touching a non-consenting person. It often happens in crowded places. It is the rubbing or touching that sexually arouses the man. Often flirterists imagine themselves being in an exclusive, affectionate sexual relationship with the victim. And often victims do not realize that they're victims because it happens so fast, or they are distracted by the crowd. People with pedophilia have recurrent, powerful sexual urges or fantasies or behaviors involving sexual activity with children, typically 13 years of age or younger. However, a pedophile, in some cases, is not just attracted to only children, but adults as well. A person to be diagnosed with pedophilia must be at least 16 years of age and at least 5 years older than the child or children that he or she has victimized. Some pedophiles restrict their deviant sexual activities to just looking at or undressing children, whereas others engage in exhibitionism, kissing, fondling, oral sex, anal intercourse, and in the case of girls, vaginal intercourse. Some pedophilic men limit their sexual activity with children to incestuous relations with family members. Others only molest children outside the family. Sexual molestation of children is a criminal act, and deservingly so. There is a stereotype for pedophiles that they are old, wear trench coats or raincoats, and hang out at schoolyards. However, usually, a pedophile is a law-abiding, respected citizen in their 30s or 40s. Most are married or divorced and have children of their own. However, some may fit the stereotype. Sexual abuse can cause a large amount of psychological harm. As you can read some of the statistics above, there are many that may have experienced sexual abuse as children. All of these psychological effects are correlated with sexual abuse in childhood. Anger, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, inappropriate sexual behaviors such as other paraphilias, aggressive behavior, drug abuse, suicide ideations and attempts, PTSD, low self-esteem, sexual dysfunction, and feelings of detachment. Adults who were sexually abused as children also have a higher risk of developing psychological disorders and physical health problems, as well as memory problems and cognitive functioning problems. Sexual abuse on children can also cause genital injuries and psychosomatic problems such as stomach aches and headaches. It may also cause children to have aggressive outbursts, be aggressive, engage in antisocial behavior, develop drug use problems, or become socially withdrawn. They also have a higher rate of becoming sexually active at a younger age or promiscuous in adolescence and adulthood. They may also suffer from sleep problems. Boys typically have more pronounced aggression, while girls internalize it and become depressed. Childhood sexual abuse is also linked to the development of borderline personality disorder, in which we will discuss in Chapter 12. Sexual masochism involves strong and recurrent sexual urges, fantasies, or behaviors in which a person becomes sexually aroused by being humiliated, bound, flogged, or made to suffer in other ways. Often, urges are acted on or cause significant personal distress. In many cases, people cannot achieve sexual gratification without the infliction of pain or humiliation. While it is still more common in men, it is also seen in many women. While many cases involve binding or mutilating oneself during masturbation or sexual fantasies, in others, a partner is engaged to restrain, blindfold, or whip a person. In rare cases, humiliation goes extremely far, and a person may desire to be urinated on, or defecated upon, or be subjected to verbal abuse. However, the most severe form is hypoxophilia, in which someone cannot achieve sexual gratification without being deprived of oxygen, whether it be by the use of a noose, plastic bag, chemical, or pressure on the chest during masturbation or sexual act. It has led to death occasionally, but the majority of the time, oxygen deprivation is ceased right before loss of consciousness. Sexual masochism is about receiving physical or psychological suffering. Sexual sadism is the opposite, in which a person does not find sexual gratification unless they are the ones inflicting physical or psychological pain on their sexual partner. Sometimes, many times, it occurs in consenting partners. However, there is a small minority in which stalk and assault non-consenting victim. Sadistic rapists fall into this group. Sadomasochism refers to the practice of mutually gratifying sexual interactions, both sadistic and masochistic acts. With all this being defined, just keep in mind that some variations of sexual behavior, such as love bites, hair pulls, and mild scratching in consensual relationships, is considered normal sexual behavior. In the video description below, there is a link that shows potentially uncomfortable sexual content in which I do not want to require my students to watch, nor do I want it to be in this video. The video discusses sexual masochism and sadism. If you feel as if you'd like to watch, feel free to follow the link to the video. Other paraphilias include telephone scatologia, which is the act of making an obscene phone call to become sexually aroused. Necrophilia, which are sexual urges or fantasies involving contact with corpses. Partialism, where sexual gratification focuses on one part of the body, such as the breast. Zoophilia is sexual urges involving contact with animals. Coprophilia is sexual urges involving feces. Clismanophilia, which involves enemas, and urophilia is sexual urges related to urinated on or being urinated on. All of these are disruptive to others, harmful to others, and the self, and are considered paraphilia that lead to a diagnosis of paraphilic disorder. Efforts to treat paraphilias are compromised by the fact that most people with these disorders do not wish to change. Current treatment options include psychoanalysis, which focus on childhood sexual conflicts, cognitive behavioral therapy, which include aversion therapy, covert sensitization, and social skills training, and biomedical therapies, which include SSRIs and anti-androgen drugs. And this wraps up the lecture for Abnormal Psychology Chapter 10. Hope you enjoyed it, learned something you didn't know, didn't get too weirded out, and I will see you in the next lecture. Ciao. Personal distress about one's sexual autonomy and anatomy. Seek to change their sex origins. People with the gender dysphoria, fetishistic. You can read some of the statistics. The mutually sadomyo to a reversal of excited